About 25 years ago, when I first started studying music, the brain, and learning, and attempting to put the puzzle together, there was one topic that everyone seemed to be talking about, and that was the Mozart effect. Parents were buying Mozart CDs for their babies and VHS tapes of Mozart for their toddlers. Teachers were playing classical music in their classrooms, and researchers were so excited. Then, almost as quickly as it appeared, the conversation changed. The Mozart effect has been debunked, they said. For years, I accepted that without giving it much thought. But over the last several years, as I've immersed myself in neuroscience, neural entrainment, and how the brain organizes itself through rhythm, something started bothering me. Not because I think Mozart magically makes people smarter, because I don't, but because the explanation no longer seemed to fit everything we now know about how the brain works. If that sounds interesting to you and you want more details, please stay tuned. Hi, I'm Becky from MusicIsAcademic, where we translate neuroscience into practical ideas for teachers, parents, and lifelong learners. Today, I want to revisit one of the most famous studies ever conducted about music and the brain. Not to prove that Mozart was right, and certainly not to argue that listening to classical music raises your IQ. Instead, I want to look at whether modern neuroscience helps us understand that famous study differently than we did 30 years ago. Let's go back to 1993. Researchers, led by Francis Rauscher at the University of California, Irvine, recruited 36 college students. The students were then divided into 3 groups. One group listened to about 10 minutes of Mozart's sonata for 2 pianos in D major K448. A second group listened to a relaxation recording, and the third group simply sat quietly in silence. Immediately afterward, everyone completed a series of spatial reasoning tasks, mental puzzles that required them to manipulate shapes and patterns in their minds. The students who had listened to Mozart performed a little better. The improvement wasn't dramatic and it wasn't permanent. It wasn't a measure of their overall intelligence. The effect lasted about 10 to 15 minutes. That's what the study actually found. Unfortunately, that's not what most people heard. The headlines quickly became, "Listening to Mozart makes you smarter." Parents embraced the idea and spent tons of money on Mozart Effect-related products. Schools embraced it. Hospitals sent classical music home with newborn babies. Even a few state governments got involved. The Mozart Effect became part of popular culture. And then science did what science is supposed to do. Researchers repeated the experiment. Sometimes they found similar results, but sometimes they didn't. Some studies suggested that people simply performed better after listening to music they enjoyed, regardless of whether it was Mozart. Eventually, many researchers concluded that the temporary improvement was probably related to increased alertment or mood, rather than anything unique about Mozart himself. By the early 2000s, the public message had become wonderfully simple. The Mozart effect isn't real. Case closed. Except, science didn't stop there. During those same decades, researchers were uncovering something remarkable about the brain. They discovered just how important timing is, and neural oscillations, and predictions, and synchronization, and neural entrainment. Today, we understand far more about how the brain responds to organized rhythmic information than the researchers did in 1993. And that's where I think this story becomes really interesting. One of the ideas I've been discussing over the last several videos is something I developed and call the rhythmic scaffold hypothesis. The basic idea is very straightforward. The brain functions best when it has predictable temporal structure to work with. Rhythm provides that structure. It helps organize attention and supports prediction. It coordinates movement and it helps different brain systems communicate much more efficiently. The way I think about it is this. The brain isn't looking for Mozart. It isn't even looking for music. The brain is looking for organization, and music simply happens to be one of the most powerful ways we've discovered to provide that organization. Think about some of the examples we've talked about in previous videos on this channel. When people bounce a leg or tap a pencil, maybe they rock in a chair or consistently click a pen, those behaviors often aren't random. They may be the brain creating its own rhythmic scaffold, its own predictable timing, because organized rhythm helps support attention and regulation. That's why I find the original Mozart study so fascinating. Maybe those 10 minutes of listening weren't making anyone smarter. Maybe they are briefly providing the brain with a stable rhythmic scaffold, just enough organized temporal input to settle attention, make prediction improve, and help several neural systems work together a little bit more efficiency while those students were completing those spatial reasoning tasks. That possibility wasn't a part of the scientific conversation in 1993. Today, it certainly is. There's another piece that makes this even more interesting. If rhythm is acting as a scaffold, then 10 minutes was never going to tell the whole story. Think about anything else the brain learns really well, whether it's reading, playing an instrument, learning a language, or even exercising. None of those things improve because of a single 10-minute experience. They improve through repetition, through practice, through thousands of organized experiences over time. They say it takes 10,000 hours to truly master something. The same appears to be true with entrainment. Repeated synchronization strengthens neural timing networks. Repeated rhythmic experiences improve predictions, and repeated practice helps the brain become more efficient at coordinating its many systems. In other words, the effects are cumulative. If that's true, then perhaps the most important limitation of the original Mozart Effect study wasn't that it used Mozart. It was that it measured 10 minutes instead of months or even years. That's a completely different question. Personally, I don't think the real story was ever about Mozart. I think the real story has always been about timing, rhythm, and the brain's remarkable ability to organize itself around predictable patterns. Looking back, I don't believe the original researchers were chasing nonsense. I think they did observe something very real. They simply didn't have the neuroscience to explain why it happened. Today, we have a much better understanding of neural entrainment, temporal organization, and the role rhythmic structure plays in attention regulation and learning. That doesn't prove the Mozart effect, but it does invite us to look at it through a much wider lens. And sometimes that's exactly how science moves forward. I'd love to hear what you think. Do you remember when the Mozart effect was absolutely everywhere? Or have you only heard that it was completely debunked and should be discarded? Leave your thoughts in the comments, and please like, subscribe, give a thumbs up to this channel, and be sure to hit the bell so you don't miss a video. In the next video, we're staying with music and the brain, but exploring something almost everyone has experienced. Why is it that one particular song gets stuck in your head for days and days? Is your brain playing tricks on you, or is it doing exactly what it was designed to do? I'll tell you in the next video. You won't want to miss it. For now, stay safe, keep learning, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care. Bye-bye.